Okay, so the Fed is confusing for normal people. That's why we need smart people to come on the show to explain things for us. Jerome Powell spoke today. I don't understand why aren't we cutting rates. Anyway, joining me now, Peter St. Onge of the amazing Heritage Foundation. He's an economist. Okay, Peter, why aren't they cutting rates? Rates are really high and it hurts and people can't get home loans and it's hurting the economy. What's going on?
It is. All of those things are true. Interest rates are at a level right now where they're squeezing regular people. So you've got mortgages up around 7%. You've got all these problems. High rates hit the banks. That's why we had a bunch of bank collapses last year. They're also bad for companies. There's this wall of corporate debt coming in. There's this wall of real estate, commercial real estate loans. So high rates are a serious problem. The issue here is that the Fed knows that if it cuts rates again, that is going to make inflation go higher. And the background here is that right now, inflation is taking off, right? So if we go back to the last 5 months, so last October, inflation was bumping along at an annualized 1%. Okay, so it went up to 1.9 in November, 2.8 December, 3.5 in January. Latest number is February. Last month, it was 5.4% annualized. So inflation is absolutely taking off. The Fed is now stuck. They're in a spot where they've got to keep rates high to at least try to keep a lid on that. And then they just keep shooting $1 trillion at anything that goes wrong. So they already shot a bunch of money at the banks. They shoot it at Wall Street. Anything they can find, they just launch $1 trillion at that. Of course, every trillion they print that way is going to lead to future inflation. So the Fed has screwed up so far. It looks like they pulled off the catastrophe they ran in the 1970s, where they launched this massive inflation, hiked rates to break the economy, and even then it ripped off again. In the 70s, it went on for another 5 years after that of high inflation. So we'll see if they manage that one again.
Peter, can you explain to people like me why 2% annualized inflation is the target? Because these smart people talk about it all the time, that's what they're going for. But for the average person like me, I don't understand why my money needs to inflate at all, let alone 2%. How did we get to this number?
Yeah, absolutely right. And they got the smoke and mirrors on it, but fundamentally there is no science behind any of this crap. It's fundamentally public relations, propaganda. The Fed's job, the reason why central banks exist, including the Fed, is to print money, to create inflation. All right, before the Fed existed in this country, we had about 150 years with no inflation. Inflation is not built into the economy. It's not a fact of life. It is created by central banks. So why does the Fed have a 2% target? Because it thinks that's the most it can steal. Right, my favorite metaphor is a gasoline thief. All right, let's say you're going and stealing some gas out of all your neighbors' cars every night. All right, the trick to that game is don't take too much at once. They're gonna notice. It's exactly how central banks operate. So they stick to 2% because they think they can get away with it. Some random banker came up with it in New Zealand 30 years ago. There's no science, there's no logic to it. And in fact, there's a bunch of Democrat inflationists who want to crank that up. So they want to get it to 3, 4, whatever they can get away with. Of course, at that point, the people start getting upset. They start voting for populists.
Yeah. Okay, Peter, I want to circle back to something you talked about the commercial real estate loan industry. I remember during COVID, the lockdowns, I had to go to New York City for some stupid media thing, but I had to go to this office building. And it was something like 50 stories. And Peter, 3 stories were in use. Everything else was empty and they were emptying out. I have been told that places like New York City now, speaking of which, they're at 50% occupancy for all of its corporate stuff. Is that what's driving this corporate loan crisis? The fact that these people who own these commercial properties, no one wants to rent them anymore.
Yeah, you always get commercial real estate going through this kind of boom bust cycle. And usually that's driven by the Fed, right? So what the Fed typically does is lower rates, interest rates. They lower it to make money cheap, all right? And then that, you kind of get this tissue fire in the economy. You get all these stupid like .com and crypto and all this crap. Just basically money is so cheap that idiots are getting it and they're playing around with it. And then the Fed usually hikes interest rates real high because it's got to stop the inflation it caused with all that cheap money. All right, so you get that boom bust cycle. Now, in that, commercial real estate is always hit really hard, right? There's a lot of idiots in commercial real estate. There's very big numbers in play. You got hundreds of millions for an individual property. So they get this flood of money. You get this big tissue fire in commercial real estate. And then when the Fed hikes rates, it comes crashing down. So that's a normal cycle. That's kind of how this launched. The problem with this particular one, the reason why it's such a problem is exactly what you're talking about with COVID. It's not just COVID, the kind of work from home that a lot of companies went through permanently. You've also got this intentional mismanagement of America's cities where, I mean, they're turning into these like apocalyptic hellscapes. Downtown San Francisco, I mean, you had to sell your firstborn to get office space on Market Street in San Francisco, right? And now it's all taken over by junkies. So all of those properties, every single one of those properties is covered in junkies now. Somebody took out like a $300 million loan for that sucker. It's sitting on some bank's books. Ooh. All right. And right now, what the banks are doing is they give them new money to service the loan so everybody can pretend that the loan is healthy. All right. Because once the loan is no longer being serviced, that's a big red mark on their book, and then the regulators have to come in and they have uncomfortable conversations. So there was actually a study, it went up in the NBER recently. They were saying that there could be 400 regional banks in the US under threat because of that collapse in commercial real estate.
Oh, I'm so unbelievably uncomfortable right now. Just the thought of a $300 million loan in a property. Oh my gosh. Okay, Peter, I want to finish up with this, the housing market, because that is it's more applicable to everybody watching right now. Yep. It's a very sad fact of life. Many Americans, more Americans than any time in my lifetime, cannot buy a home right now. Why can't normal people afford a home anymore?
Yeah, well, the prices skyrocketed. Again, thanks to the Fed. So the Fed pumped out the easy money, home prices went up. And then when the Fed tried to, hide what it dumped on the living room carpet, it jacked rates up. So now mortgages go up. If prices go up and mortgages go up, it becomes out of reach for regular people to get a house. So right now, if you want to qualify for the median house, we're not talking a mansion, the median house, you gotta make $100,000 a year, all right? And your monthly payment on a new mortgage is gonna be close to $3,000. That's like half of household income for the median family. So houses are absolutely out of reach. And what we're seeing now is young people, they are completely giving up, right? People in their 20s, it used to be that's when you're gonna build up for your house, you're gonna start a family, you're gonna start building a future, your financial foundation. No, they're giving up. They go out, they take a cruise to the Bahamas, they don't bother getting married, they're not gonna have kids. Why? Because this is all out of reach. So for the first time, we got kids, they grew up in a house that their parents owned, all right? And they're like 40 years old eating ramen with the roommates now. That is a lifestyle that is unimaginable to them at this point. And I think it's just gonna keep getting worse. The pressures between the house prices, the rates are gonna stay high now. We just had a Fed meeting today. They said they're gonna keep it higher for longer. So those mortgage rates are gonna stay up. And then, you got these other things jumping in, like home insurance is so high now. You got about 20 million Americans who are actually going without insurance. All these costs are slamming the door closed to people buying a house. That means they're gonna be renters forever. If you're a renter forever, you are building nothing. You are not building a retirement. You're not building the basis for a family.